Now, a Free Market News ETV special presentation.
Hi, welcome to the program. There are three types of people: people that make things happen, people that watch things happen, and people who don't know what happened. Well, you're obviously not number three, maybe you're number two, but if you're number one, people who like to make things happen, this program is for you. If you are a doer but are frustrated, you try to do things in reference to the free market thinking, and it's like you're on a treadmill and you're not going anywhere, this program is for you because we have an excellent guest to help you solve those problems. Mr. Ed Griffin. Ed Griffin is the director of Freedom Force International. That is a website, freedomforceinternational.org. Also the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, and a number of other books that you're going to find out about. Ed, very nice to have you here.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Freedom Force International. We have people out there right now who are frustrated with the way local government is working in their lives. They're trying to do something and they're frustrated. Is this something that can be helpful to them?
Well, that's specifically what this organization was created for, is for those kinds of people. I'm glad you started the way you did with the three kinds of people in the world, because definitely that's true. And, you know, I've been monitoring the growth of government and the corresponding loss of personal freedoms for many years. I won't even tell you how many years. It's embarrassing to think about it, but certainly from the 1960s on. And it was always so frustrating to me to see how many people there were that didn't seem to care about what was going on and didn't want to know. That was bad enough, but what really bothered me were the people who knew but didn't do anything about it. They were sort of apathetic. Say, well, you can't fight City Hall, you know. There's nothing we can do about it. And so they were quite apathetic, I thought. And then I realized that their apathy was more or less my doing. And the reason I say that, I'll give you my little 2-minute seminar on apathy. I realized that if you were in a rubber raft, picture this in your mind. You're in a rubber raft out in the middle of the ocean, and you look over the edge and you see bubbles coming up over the edge, and you think, uh-oh, there's a leak in the raft. Well, what are you going to do? You just lie there and sink. You are the picture of apathy. But if you change the scenario, and now you look around the raft and there's an air pump and a place to screw it in, now what are you doing? You're pumping away, and you'll be pumping air into that raft for days and days until you have no energy left. You are now Mr. Activism. And the only difference between those two pictures is that in the first case there was nothing you could do, and in the second case there was at least something you could do, so by golly you went and did it. And I realized that I was doing such a good job of convincing people that things were so bad that there was nothing that could be done about it. It had gone too far. And so I was planting this apathy in their minds. I realized, oh my gosh, that was a terrible thing to do. And from those days on, I always resolved that if I ever had a chance to talk about problems, which I do a lot, I would certainly try and follow it with solutions. The only trouble with that is that for a long time, I really didn't have my heart in it, because I didn't really think that the way things were going, that we could turn this around. But I kept on the track anyway. I wanted to, be in there for the good fight, just in case a miracle would come along and the American people would wake up and change the system and so forth. But I really had serious doubts that it would happen. And then about 2.5 years ago, things began to change in my mind. I realized that there was an important missing link, in my opinion, in this battle against the growth of government. The missing link, once I got a clear focus on it, was something that I incorporated into the organization that we're talking about, which is Freedom Force International. The missing link was this. Those of us who were concerned about the growth of government were always complaining about and fearful of power. We said, look at those people over there. They've got so much power. That's our problem. We must dismantle this power. And that was true. But the rest of it was, we said to ourselves, we ourselves must reject power. We must never have power. over society because that was the problem, we said. Well, one morning I woke up and realized, wait a minute, if we don't have power, how can we overthrow power? I realized that there's never been a tyranny of history that was overthrown unless it was overthrown by equal or greater power than itself. And so as long as we hold that viewpoint that we ourselves must reject power, we lose. It's as simple as that. And then that was a very hard thing for me to accept because it represented not only an epiphany, but a complete change of direction of my thinking and my efforts. And it was hard. It took me weeks to really assemble that and get used to the idea. Now, on the surface, it's obvious that this is true, but still, it should raise a red flag because, we've all heard the saying of Lord Acton, who said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, he's absolutely correct. Power is dangerous. And here we are talking about reaching for power. It's like reaching for something that's very dangerous, you see. It is dangerous. So we need to think in terms of how we can acquire power and at the same time make sure that if we are successful, that we ourselves are not corrupted by it or those who follow us are not corrupted by it. But it's dangerous, but we have to have it. It's like guns, Having guns is dangerous. The only thing more dangerous is not having guns. Having power is dangerous because it can corrupt us or someone. But not having power is far more dangerous because it means we cannot defend our liberties. So we have to deal with this issue. How do we acquire power and use it responsibly and have controls?
What is power?
Well, power is the ability to affect society. Power is the ability to determine the affairs of another person. There are many kinds of power. Money is power, of course. Charisma is power. Political force is power. Military force is power. Women have a certain power, do they not? Over men. This is power. And there are many ways that you can influence another person. And it's not necessarily bad. That's just the way human nature is. We're always trying to influence society or our friends or our family for what we think is for their own good or the good of society or the good of the family and so forth. But there are people who are afraid of power because it does bring responsibility. If you have power, you have a responsibility for those people over whom you have influence. So this is what we're talking about. How do we acquire the kind of power to change society, to alter the form of government, power to determine the kind of a world in which our children and our grandchildren are going to live?
This is one of the frustrations that somebody tuning in right now must have. They are a doer. They are in the community trying to make something happen. They've experienced a problem with local government in their lives in one form or another, in the school system, something in their families being affected. They are trying to do something and they do not seem to have the power. They get up against 6 or 7 people on a commission and they're powerless. And now we get to Freedom Force International. You gave us several descriptions of what power is. Where is the power here with Freedom Force International for someone who needs to solve a problem?
Well, you've hit the nail right on the head. We're always up against some commission, and what usually is stopping us is some government agency or laws on the books, some group of people who have power over us through the instrument of government, and they use the coercion of government to compel us to conform to a particular code of conduct or action or a tax or whatever it is that we don't necessarily like. And so the usual response is to, well, let's write a letter to our congressman. Well, our congressman is the problem. So why are we writing a letter to our congressman? He's the guy that passed the law in the first place. But we think if we write a letter to our congressman and let him know that we don't like it, that this is going to change something. He doesn't really care whether we like it or not because we have no power. The power that the congressmen generally represent, now this is not all of them, but unfortunately a large number of them, the power that they respect is the power of the campaign contribution and the power of the media, the two elements that are necessary for him to be elected. And there are people in this world who have not only the power of the purse, have a lot of money. They can make campaign contributions in one form or another, and they can also direct the media to make sure that this guy has favorable publicity, or the other way around, if he doesn't play the game, they can make him look like a blithering idiot in the eyes of his constituency. So he respects that power and fears it, and follows the wishes of those who hold it much more than he does the guy with one lone little vote out there. So that's reality, and we may hate it. I hate it, but that is the world in which we live, and so what are we going to do about it? And this is where Freedom Force International comes in. I decided when I had this change in view and this awakening that we needed a new kind of an organization that followed this knowledge and did something about it. And so we created Freedom Force International, which, as the name suggests, is truly international in scope. We now have members in 8 countries, and that's just the beginning, because this is a problem that's everywhere in the world, you see. But our people are determined and resolved to do something about it, to reach for power. Now, how do you do that? You do that, I think, first by studying how our opponents did that. There's a method. Much to our amazement, we discovered that these people, and I'm going to name them in a second by their category, not by name, that they are collectivists. That's the name for them. They follow an ideology called collectivism. Well, that's not our theme today, but just as a shorthand description, collectivists believe that government is the solution for all problems. I don't care what the problem is. The fix is in a new law which restricts our freedom and gives the politicians and the social engineers and the bureaucrats the power to tell us what to do.
Is that what the European Union is doing right now?
Oh, exactly, yes. Not only the European Union, but the United States, and the whole world is moving in that direction. And they may disagree on minor points, and they may fight among each other as to who is going to have the best positions, but they all agree in the direction that they're going, which is the growth of government, the increasing power of an international government, and the regimentation of all mankind in accordance with the dictates that these all-wise, wonderful people think is best for society. You see, this is the collectivist mentality. They're going to help us whether we want to be helped or not, and we're going to do it their way because it's in our best interest, they say.
When people communicate with you on your website, freedomforceinternational.org, and they learn about you, they're doers, they're trying to solve some problems, how familiar are they with the problems of collectivism, or is there a gradual learning process? Somebody tunes into your website, they start learning things, how to make some changes, they educate themselves, they learn about collectivism. How many people do you have that have found out later on what collectivism is, for example? Well, do they come knowing ahead of time?
Well, everyone in Freedom Force International knows, because that's part of the process that you go through before you decide that, hey, this is the organization I want to be part of. And that's the understanding of collectivism, because one of our primary messages is that our enemy is not communism, socialism, fascism, Nazism, any of these things. These are words that nobody really can define. Unfortunately, too many people are wrapped up in these endless debates as a contest between conservatives and liberals, and nobody can define that. Left-wing versus right-wing, nobody can define that. Now we've got neoconservatives, we've got Republicans versus Democrats, nobody can define that. Now we've got libertarians, and even the libertarians aren't quite sure what that is. All of these words are flying around, and people are in these heated debates over words that they can't define, which is a terrible waste of human energy, I think. So we're trying to point out to people, in the Western world at least, all of the political debates boil down basically to 2 ideological positions. One is collectivism, and the other is individualism. Okay. Now, that is a whole other topic. Maybe we can come back to that. But if
Not
anybody
kidding.
wants to know what our views on that are, they can certainly come to our website, and they'll get plenty of information on that.
All right, yeah, your website, once again, freedomforceinternational.org. And when somebody clicks onto the website, what kind of information do they see at first?
Well, they'll get sort of an overview of what we think the problems in the world are, which are the growth of government and the loss of personal freedoms. But very soon they're going to be introduced to this concept of collectivism versus individualism,
Sure.
because we think it's important to know the enemy, to really know what he looks like and not look at all those masks that he puts out there. And I'll give you just a brief description of that, because it's too juicy a topic to say, well, it's a good topic and leave it alone. It's like going into the supermarket. They give you a little taste, so that you want to have the rest of it. We've identified 5 basic pillars of collectivism. One of them is this concept that the group is more important than the individual, that the individual must be sacrificed if necessary for the greater good of the greater number. Okay? Now that's pretty appealing. That's a concept that I was taught in school. And I thought it was a great idea. After all, the majority should rule, right? And you can't sacrifice the majority for some minority. And so I bought into it. It's the basis of this word, another word that's hard to define, we call democracy, majority rule and so forth. But when you think about it, it's not such a hot idea, this majority rule. Consider a lynch mob. Well, there's only one dissenting vote, and he's at the end of the rope. So, well, wait a minute, majority is ruling there, isn't it? Maybe we ought to put some qualifications in there, and now we start to think. That's a dangerous thing in modern society. But we come quickly to the realization that the majority should rule, yes, but not to the extent of violating the rights of the individual or a minority. Right. So a pure democracy is not a good idea. But when you start putting legal and constitutional restraints on the will of the majority in order to protect the minority, now you're talking about something that they used to call the republic, another word to be defined. But the concepts underneath are very clear. So the collectivist, nevertheless, holds to that idea that if 51% of the people want something, then it should happen, no questions asked at all about it. And, this is the mentality of fascism, communism, Nazism. All of those totalitarian concepts are based on the idea that the individual must be sacrificed if necessary for the greater good of the state. Now, the state represents society. It represents the majority. It represents the greater good of the greater number.
It sounds like when you apply collectivism to a republic, it's a way of inverting the whole system of taking the rights away from individuals.
It's exactly how it turns out. It's not necessarily the theoretical base. I mean, people start out rather idealistically thinking they're going to do good for individuals as well as groups, but it always turns out the other way around, because there are people who determine what is the greatest good for the greater number. And you talk about the corruptibility of power. That's a lot of power. Sure. So no matter what happens, if they have to sacrifice one person or thousands of people, as long as they can say, well, it was for the betterment of the greater number, then that washes their hands of it, you see.
People who decide to join your website, freedomforceinternational.org, do they have stories, personal stories of they tried to make a change somewhere, or they were victims of a local government situation?
Yes, we do run into that, but the story we find most often, John, is the individual who felt that he was all alone. He thought that he was the only one left on the planet that saw reality. Everyone else was insane. And he gave up and said, well, what's the use? I can't do anything. I'm only one person. He didn't realize that there are so many other people out there just like himself. And so one of the goals of Freedom Force is to allow all of us who have felt this way more times than we want to admit to realize that we're not alone, and to try and give us strength through our unity.
Now, before someone can do anything, and before they go into some kind of battle of dealing with collectivism and governments and so forth, you have to sharpen your arrows, you have to build up your arsenal. And there is a website that you're also associated with, the Reality Zone. And this is the knowledge building aspect of it, am I correct?
That's correct. That's our bookstore. We have books and videos and audio tapes in there. People come into this program at various levels of awareness, various levels of understanding of the problem. And so, we are firm believers that you not only must know what's going on in the world before you try to change it, pretty obvious, isn't it?
Sure.
But you ought to have a pretty good idea of how you want to change it, what it is you want to see come out the other side of it. You have to know what you believe in, as well as what you're opposed to. I may use that grammatical inexactitude.
Sure.
But knowing what you believe in is very important, and that's one of the weaknesses, too, unfortunately, in the past over our opposition to tyranny. History is full of cases where people have risen up against some dreaded dictator or tyrant, and at great cost in treasure and blood, they have finally overthrown this one regime. And then they wake up a few years later to discover that they've replaced it with one just the same or worse. And the reason for that is that they thought that the problem was the individual. They thought the whole problem was that man. He was a bad man. All we have to do is replace him with a good man, you see. And without realizing that the system that sustains people is more important, really, than the individuals themselves. And they have no concept of what system it would take in order to make it possible even for scoundrels to serve and not be dangerous. I have to tell you, we learned this, of course, over and over again in history, but one of the most succinct statements of it came from Thomas Jefferson. After the United States Constitution was drafted and the Republic was put into place, Jefferson received a letter from a friend. And he said, Mr. Jefferson, he said, now that we have our Republic and we're electing people to office, how can we be sure that only good men are elected? It seemed to him that that was important. And Jefferson's reply was classic. He was irate. You could almost hear him snarling off the page. He said, "Speak to me not of good men. Rather, let us bind men down with the chains of the Constitution." What a brilliant statement of political philosophy. He was saying, in essence, of course we're not going to have good men. We are going to have scoundrels.
Right. So
So don't design a system for only good men. You've got to design a system so that the scoundrels can get in there and they can't do too much damage. And this is what we think people need to know this.
That's a very fundamental political theology that rings true everywhere.
Yes. But unfortunately, in today's electorate, we're always looking for the saint. We're looking for the man on the white horse who's going to lead us out of the problem. And invariably, the man on the white horse will be on a black horse.
One of the most amazing books you have in your arsenal, The Creature from Jekyll Island, the story of the history of the Federal Reserve Board, how it got started. People can find this book at Reality Zone.
Yes.
And that's www.realityzone.com.
Yes.
All right. Would definitely recommend that you make this book a part of your reading. Get started. Get your arsenal lined up. If you are a doer that is frustrated, wondering, gee, what's going on? I'm not getting any results here. People can't hear me. Or maybe you kind of know what you're talking about, but there are some aspects that are gray. And you definitely need this website, Reality Zone. Get your arsenal set up. Learn what's happening in the world, the governments today, and then be a part of the website, freedomforceinternational.org. Our guest, Edward G. Griffin. Ed, it's been great to have you on. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
This has been a Free Market News ETV special presentation. Visit us online at freemarketnews.com.